welcome back to the Lynn's Handmade YouTube channel. My name is Lindsay and I'm the owner and creator behind all the patterns you see on this channel. If you are new here because you found me through Bag of the Month Club, welcome. I am so glad you're here. I hope that you'll consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel and checking out the rest of the patterns I have to offer. We are the October featured bag pattern of the month for the Bag of the Month Club. This is the Rae Dual Zip Crossbody pattern. If you've been following me for a while, you may know that a lot of my patterns are named after special people in my life. Either they influenced the pattern or they're family members or I just love them dearly or all of the above. This one is no different. My friend Rae challenged me to create a dual zippered crossbody bag that was this general shape. She said, there's plenty of patterns out there that look like this, but just to one compartment. Can you please design one with two? Challenge accepted. It took a lot of trial and error and way more brain cells than I ever thought that I had possible, but this was born and I am so proud of it. As you may have noticed as I'm wearing it, there is this front kind of hidden zipper compartment. It is a nice spacious size. It takes up that whole front panel. We've already talked about how it has two compartments. You got one in the front here, one in the back, and this back wall also has an interior zipper pocket. One thing I really like about this bag is it's a great size. It looks great as a crossbody, but the other thing I really love to do is also shorten it so that I can wear it kind of as a sling. I love when my bag is close to my body and I have easy access here. If you don't like it on your front, you can certainly swing it to your back for a different look. I have made it in all types of material. This one is quilt cotton, but I've also tried bonded nylon. I have tried all vinyl, and this one I even made for my husband. It's a waxed canvas, and to make it a little bit more masculine looking, I just added a side buckle. So you would just eliminate the D-ring part of the construction and you would just add your webbing on the back to the back main panel, and boom. Sporty sling. Super versatile. It is advanced simply because it is finished with binding on the inside, but I've tried a technique from a very generous Facebook group member, Carrie Herb, who shared her technique. Once I tried it, I was like, this is it. I will never do binding any other way. I did mention how I was the October bag of the month, which we tend to do beginning, intermediate, and advanced, so this was slated as an advanced pattern, and I really rated it that way mainly because we're sewing curves, we're sewing a gusset, and the fact that it is finished with binding. I do encourage you to use the same material for your binding as your lining, because then it really does help blend it in and make it less noticeable. I'm going to walk you through step by step so that you are successful too. For today's video, I am doing entirely quilt cotton for this make. So the exterior and lining pieces are both quilt cotton. And in the instructions, I do recommend you use a mid-weight interfacing versus a woven interfacing versus the lighter weight. So I just kind of want to show you the difference. This is the Shape Flex 101. It's really soft fabric-like. And then this is a mid-weight. So if you compare them, this is, again, really soft, kind of drapey, and this is a little bit stiffer. So it's one step up from SF 101. If you're going to do quilt cotton for everything and you only have the SF 101, you may just want to do 2 layers of this or find the mid-weight woven interfacing and then interface all of the pieces. I find it easiest to block fuse that, so that means I cut strips of my interfacing and strips of my fabric, fused it all, and then cut out my pieces so that I'm not cutting 2 of each and then fusing and hoping the interfacing lines up perfectly. One thing I do want to talk about is that for this gusset exterior piece, we are doing the woven interfacing on the back, but we are also calling for additional stabilizers. So this is decovil light fused to the back of this. And I have noticed in my testing that if you're using a nylon type based material, after I fused it, it does shrink. So what I did in this case, even though block fusing kind of pre-shrinks beforehand, I cut it a generous rectangle, fuse this in the center, and then cut it down. So if you are going to fuse the decovil light to any of your pieces, I would encourage you to double check the measurements after because it can shrink on certain materials. So once you've got all your pieces cut out and interfaced, the next step that I had done is added all of the center markings to the tops and bottoms of all the main body pieces and liners, the centers of each of the gussets and zipper panels and everything. And I hope that you're using the little pattern labels to kind of really help you stay organized, because I know it can get overwhelming with similar rectangles and lots of pieces. Now, as I mentioned, this does have some binding on the interior to finish the bag. So I have cut my quilt cotton into strips, and the way that we're doing this binding, we don't have to worry about cutting it on the bias. So if you're very familiar with binding bags and have your own method and are very comfortable with it, you're certainly welcome to do the 1/2" double fold bias tape or elastic, whatever your preference is. But I would encourage you to give this method a try. A member of our Facebook group, Carrie, had shared this and how she bound the Mav pack, and I'm telling you, it was a game changer. It made binding so much easier. So go ahead and cut out your strips, but don't worry about cutting it on the bias, and do not interface this piece. I had mentioned you didn't need to interface the bias strips. You also do not need to interface the zipper tabs. And I would encourage you to stick with the lining fabric for both the exterior front zipper and the interior zipper, because we want these as lightweight as possible, because the side edges can get bulky when we go to sew up the final perimeter of the bag. So don't interface these, and in fact on that front zipper you're not even going to see these at all, so they can all be the same material. Let's talk hardware we're going to need. Actually, it's very, very minimal. You just need the 2 3/4" D-rings and then hardware for the removable strap. Now, we are doing a removable strap with the swivel clasp because the D-rings do need to be 3/4" because they have to fit on that top panel portion. So you're not going to be able to use a 1" or 1.5" strap directly added to the bag because that area is so narrow. So I wouldn't skip on this. Again, it's not a whole lot of hardware, so hopefully that's not a big deal. But so you're just going to need this 2 swivel clasps for the strap, a strap adjuster, and then we're doing webbing because there's so many beautiful webbings out there. It's just way easier to make a strap out of a high quality webbing and call it a day. I do have 4 zipper pulls. I've added 2 already to the 2 smaller zippers, and I've left the other zipper pulls off the larger zippers because I find it easiest to add those once that top panel is complete. Next, I want to talk about some of the tools that I use while making this bag that I find to make my life way easier. They're not required to make this, but you may want to give it a try to make things go much smoother for you. First is 1/8" double-sided tape. I use this for installing our zippers. It keeps all of the layers together and prevents your zipper from shifting out of place. This is a stiletto and seam ripper combination tool. The stiletto is really, really helpful when I'm trying to hold the binding strips in place for that final sew. Highly recommend having one of those handy. This is a stapler. I use it to staple the gusset to the main body pieces, and it keeps everything from shifting out of place. I know as I'm manipulating my bag under the machine, sometimes clips can go flying and then everything starts to shift. So this I found to just be completely invaluable in making this bag. So if you do use the stapler, you're going to need some sort of staple remover, which I have here. And then of course we need clips for markings and then just holding stuff together. Now, if you've been around here any amount of time, you know I like to get my straps out of the way so that when we finish the bag, we truly are done. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my webbing here and the strap adjuster, and we're going to thread this one is kind of curved. So if your hardware is curved, make sure you're paying attention that the curve is toward the top. So we're going to thread one side up the left side and come back over through the other side over the bar. And then we're going to do this a double fold under here, and we're going to go ahead and sew a row of stitching here to secure, or if you want to add rivets, you're welcome to do 2 rivets there. So as you can see, I did stitch this in place. I'm using white thread. Obviously I'm black webbing so that you can see it for this tutorial, but I would encourage you to use a blending thread so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. So now that this folded edge is on the underside, we're going to go ahead and grab the loose end and thread 1 swivel clasp on, just like this. Make sure to keep your strap nice and straight. Then we're going to take the loose end and come up now the right side of the strap adjuster, go over the center again and back down through the other side. So then you can pull this through. You have one swivel clasp on one end. Now we're going to take the second swivel clasp and do a double fold to the back here, just like this, and do another row of stitching here, or your rivets and your adjustable, removable crossbody strap will be done. So just stitch that end down. Now our crossbody strap is finished. Let's go ahead and move on to the D-ring tab. So first thing, we're going to flip it over to the wrong side, and we're going to go ahead and draw a center line the length of the D-ring tab here. Now this is just a normal pen, but I'm not worried about it being removable. I just need to be able to see the line. I can lay a strip of double-sided tape here and fold those edges in, or you can use a craft glue stick. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay the tape down. And we're going to fold the long edges into this line, just like this. Now we're going to be sewing the long edges an 1/8 inch from that edge, so we're not going to be sewing through any tape if you're worried about that. Otherwise, you can use a craft glue stick and get it to lay nicely as well. So now we're going to take it to the sewing machine. Like I said, we're going to sew an 1/8 inch from each long edge. Okay, so now we're just going to fold it in half and cut it into 2 equal pieces. Okay, so now with the seam side up, I like to take a craft glue stick and run it along that seam for both pieces before I thread my D-rings on. So we're going to thread it so the seam side is up, fold it over, and give this a chance to dry. This will kind of also help prevent the D-ring from spinning with use, in addition to sewing closely to the D-ring. But I know that some people can't get as close to the D-ring that would be ideal to prevent it from spinning. So I like to seal it with some glue. So then I'll just set it aside to dry, and we'll be ready for these in a later set. Continuing along with our prep work, we're going to grab the 2 smaller zippers with the zipper pulls already added and the 4 zipper tabs. So you're going to lay each zipper tab along the edge here, and you're going to lay it face down, aligning these short edges on both sides. Just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and clip these in place, and we're going to sew these down a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, so right sides are together. We're going to sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance, then we're going to press it away and top stitch. I like to do it all at once. Versus stopping and back stitching and clipping and moving on to the next one. Just do it in a chain stitch. Alrighty, let's press them away and top stitch an 1/8 inch. Lastly, we'll go ahead and fold it in half and mark the centers along the zipper tape. For this next step, we only need one of these zippers, so I'm going to set the other one off to the side. And then I'm going to need one of these main body liner pieces, and we can set the rest off to the side. And I'm going to need the 2 interior pocket liners. Now I went ahead and cut the one liner into 2 pieces per pattern instructions. Now I just want to go ahead and add that center mark to the straight cut edge on both pieces. You can mark it with a pin, you can do little itty bitty snips, do it however you want, but we need to, these center marks are really important landmarks. So starting with this piece and our trusty dusty 1/8 inch double-sided tape, we're going to lay a strip of tape down here and then place the zipper with the zipper pull to the left, face down on top, lining up those center marks. All right, go ahead and remove that double-sided tape backing. Line up your center mark with your center mark and keep those edges nicely aligned. You will have some of the zipper tab extend beyond the edges. That's fine. We will be trimming those down. Just like that. And now we're going to take one of the pocket liners and we're going to lay it face down on top. But again, I do like the double-sided tape to prevent it from shifting, so I'm going to add another layer. When we install our zippers, we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we should not be stowing through this narrow double-sided tape. So now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew across that top straight edge a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm coming up to my zipper pull, so I want my needle in the down position. I'm going to reach inside, move it out of the way, and finish that edge. Next, we want to go ahead and press both pieces away from the zipper, and we're going to top stitch below the zipper 1/8 inch along the top. Just gave it a good press with my iron, so now I'm going to go ahead and do my 1/8 inch top stitch. Next, we need to add the top piece and the back side of the liner. So I did add my double-sided tape here along that top edge. You're going to lay this straight edge face down on top, lining up those center notches here. Just like that. We're going to flip it over to the back side. I have some more double-sided tape along that top edge, and we're going to add the second pocket liner. Line up those notches and the top edges. Just like before, we're going to go ahead and sew this a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and move your zipper pull out of the way. Coming up to my zipper pull, I need to move that out of the way. Just like before, we're going to go ahead and press this top edge away from the zipper and leave this bottom edge going towards the bottom. And we're going to top stitch right along there an 1/8 inch. All right, so now we just need to close up our pocket. You'll notice the back side is overhanging by a 1/2 inch on the one side. So we're going to go ahead and trim that up so it's flush with this pocket liner. Then we're going to fold the edges to the back side 3/8 inch and clip, and we're going to sew up both sides. Quickly before we sew our pocket shut, I'm going to go ahead and trim up these zipper tab sides so they are flush with the edges. So I'm going to start by flipping this bottom portion up and slipping it underneath my foot. We're just going to sew along these edges starting at that bottom edge. Drop my needle down in here. Once I come to this bottom edge, I'm going to pivot and come in on a 45-degree angle towards the center and sew this way, and then trim off this excess corners. So then when we sew up the hole later, it will reduce bulk in those corners. Just going to drop my needle down, pivot as I sew off the edge. And repeat with the other side. And then just trim off the angles. So now we have this open, these are sewn, I've trimmed down those corners. Now before we move along, I want you to go ahead and grab another liner and set this on top. Ideally, it should be exactly the same length if you followed an accurate seam allowance, but if you do find that it is not quite right, any trimming you're gonna do, you wanna do it from this top edge. So line it up. If it happens to, extend a bit, go ahead and trim it so it's flush and then remark your center. But let this be a reminder that if it's not quite accurate, we really want to work on our seam allowances for the next step so that our gusset fits really well. Now, if you happen to take a much bigger seam allowance, the 3/8 inch seam allowance, and it's too small, so now it's not lining up with this liner, I would encourage you to seam rip it and redo it. Otherwise, everything's not going to line up and it will have a ripple effect to your gusset. So it's not like we can just simply trim down all of the pieces to match this, because your gusset will then be too big. So again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure you're accurate with your seam allowances. Next up, we're making the exterior zipper pocket on that front panel. So you're going to need your front zipper top, your front zipper bottom, exterior and a liner, and then one of the main body liners and that second smaller zipper. We're going to install this zipper very similarly to what we just did with the interior zipper pocket. I'm laying my double-sided tape down. I want my zipper pull to the left. I'm going to line up these center markings along the straight edge of this bottom piece. And I'm going to press that into the tape. Then we're going to take the lining portion and sandwich the zipper. So right side's facing the wrong side of the zipper, but the right side of your exterior. Line up those centers. The top edge there. And because we are doing the zipper install, this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that top. We're going to press both pieces to the back side away from the zipper and top stitch. I'm feeling my zipper. I got to stop with my needle down, move it out of the way. All right, go ahead and press them both away from the zipper. Grab the front zipper top portion and flip it to the wrong side. Go ahead and measure 1 inch down from that top curved edge and draw your line. I'm going to take some double-sided tape and lay it down just below the line. And we're going to fold that straight edge along the bottom up to the line. Just like this. Here we go. So this point is where it differs from how we did the interior pocket, because we're not going to sew a second lining piece here. That's where this main body liner comes in hand, because it will make this entire panel a usable pocket above and below versus just below the top stitching. So now we're going to take this panel and we're going to lay a piece of double-sided tape along that top folded edge, just like this. And then we're going to actually lay this zipper tape right at that top of the fold. So I'm going to lay this centered on top of this here, lining up those notches, and press the tape just to the top edge of the fold here. Just like this. Okay. So we are going to kind of sew this blind, because we're going to sew from this back side. We're not going to actually see what we're sewing on the front. So if you have a different color in your bobbin, it's the bobbin color that's going to show on the front as we sew this. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to use this edge as my guide and sew a 1/4 inch below from this side. Stop and move my zipper out of the way. There you go. I'm going to go ahead and trim off these zipper tabs so it's flush. The edges, just like that. Now you're going to go ahead and lay this on top of the lining piece, lining up the bottom edges first. So make sure that's all lined up and then check that it is a perfect fit. So right side up, right side up. Flip it over. I do see that the top extends a little bit, and that is okay, but we're going to trim from the top. We're not trimming along the bottom. So we're going to clip these in place and then just trim off that 1/4 inch from the top so that it's all perfectly even with the lining piece. So now they line up perfectly around. So because I did trim off this top, I do want to go ahead and fold this top panel in half to find my center again, because that's an important landmark. So re-add that. And then we'll want to add these markings on the side as well. So we're going to have to fold that in half, add those center marks. Actually don't need the lining in there, but just like this. Okay, so now that we have this, we're going to baste around the edge, and then that will make this pocket inside lined there. This top edge is not lined, and that's perfectly fine. We want to keep this bulk up here to a minimum, and you will never see up under that pocket, so I've chosen to eliminate it. Grab one more piece, one more lining piece, and go ahead and flip it to the wrong side and lay this whole panel on top, lining up those edges. So now inside you see a liner, and on the back side of the front panel you see a lining as well. Baste around the edge 1/8 inch from the entire perimeter. Go ahead and adjust your seam allowances to the maximum your machine will go for this basting stitch, and sew the perimeter. I've moved my zipper towards the center so it's not in the way underneath there. There we go, the front and the lining should be on the back. I apologize, I forgot to mention, before you baste that liner piece to the opposite side, if you wanted to add your label on anywhere, feel free, but sew it on before you baste it down to this, because otherwise you're just going to sew through your pocket. But I plan to add a cute little label to the back piece, so that's what I'm going to do now before I baste these wrong sides together, just like we did for the front. So probably going to put it right here, centered along the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and stitch that in place, and then we're going to lay these wrong sides together and repeat what we did with this, basting these together so there's a front and a liner. Don't forget to turn your stitch length back to the standard stitch length after you've basted. We have a front with completed front with the front and a liner, and then the completed back with a liner. So we're all done with those. We're going to set them aside, and then we're going to grab our dual zipper portion. So we have two longer zippers. We have the zipper panel sides. These are two lining pieces. We have the zipper panel sides, two exterior pieces. This is the exterior zipper panel, and then this is the liner for this panel. So we're keeping the zipper pulls off while we do this. I find it easiest. So we're going to start with this exterior zipper panel and one of the zippers. So just laid the double-sided tape along that top edge. I'm going to peel that backing off, and then we're going to lay it face down on top, lining up these center markings. This is important to take your time and line up those top edges so your zipper doesn't end up wavy. That and an accurate seam allowance. So we've got that. Then we're going to take the zipper panel liners. We're just going to take one of them, and we're going to lay it face down on top. Line up those center marks. All right, so we're installing a zipper, so we're still at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and sew this top edge. Now I want you to press the exterior portion away from the zipper and top stitch just through the exterior. We want this lining piece still well under the zipper. We are not going to top stitch through that. So here's what you have so far. The lining is underneath the zipper, and that's what we want. So now we're going to go ahead and add the second zipper along this edge of the top exterior panel. Literally from here on out, we're going to be doing everything twice. So we're just going to go ahead and repeat that same process with the other zipper on the opposite edge of this panel here. Right sides together. That's what we call a zipper sandwich. Here we go. All right, 1/4 inch seam allowance across, and then we're going to leave this underneath the tape, and we're just going to top stitch only through the exterior. So this is what the front looks like, this is what the back looks like. So just the centers here. So now we don't want these liners. I'm just going to in the way for the next portion, so I'm going to finger press them away from the zipper, both sides, just like that. And I'm just going to hold them in this position with clipping like this. All right, so now that frees up this zipper tape so we can add our zipper panel sides. Now the reason I've added these sides is so when we attach the front and back exteriors in the final step and have to bind it, we're not sewing up against a zipper tape. I find that especially difficult. This just gives you a little extra wiggle room to sew around your panel, so that's why these are added. Now, as you can see, I am using directional print material, so I do want to be mindful of that. I'm going to have these panels going the same direction, or you can decide if you want them going opposite direction, but for this tutorial, I'm going to have them all going this way. I've already added some double-sided tape, so we'll just start with this top edge here. And we're going to lay our center notch down on top here. And then flip it over. I have more double-sided tape and add a liner piece. Here is the center notches. There we go. Just like that. Now, if you want to, keep things moving along, you could do the exact opposite on this and sew everything together. But for instructional purposes, we're going to do one side at a time. So we're going to sew that top edge a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to press both lining pieces and exterior away from the zipper and top stitch through both layers. I can feel with this underhand that my liners are out of the way. They're not tucked under, and we're sewing through that when we shouldn't be. All right, so this is important that the exterior portion is pressed really well away from the zipper, as well as the lining away from the zipper. So I'll probably take this to the iron and press it really well. And then we're going to line up both edges and clip along it so that these edges stay aligned. We don't want our lining to accidentally pull under a little bit and get rolled, and then they are not the same. So go ahead and take it to your iron and press them both well, and then clip so that all the edges are aligned. Careful with your iron that you don't touch your coils, because that certainly can melt them. I know if you're using anything thicker than quilt cotton, it's not uncommon for this liner to kind of not pull as tightly away from the zipper, and it tends to roll. So that's why I'm emphasizing that you press it really well, or finger press it, and line them up before you top stitch. Just like this. So now from the front side, we're top stitch through both layers. Just make sure you can see that lining the whole time. If it disappears underneath, make sure you pause to pull it so they align. So now, again, we're going to repeat with the other zipper. Sandwich the zipper tape and pull both lining and exterior away and top stitch. Here's where we're at so far. We're going to go ahead and unclip these liner pieces because we do need to add our D-rings and we don't want to sew through the lining. So I'm going to let them naturally fall open like they want to. And before we do add our zipper pulls on, we do want to make sure that this is exactly 4 inches high. So ideally, if you follow the seam allowance and use the proper width zipper tape, it should be 4 inches. So you could see some of it's just a little uneven. So I'm going to take this time to just make sure that I'm evening it up so that it is perfectly 4 inches. And any amount that I take off of one side, I want to take off the other side. So you just want to be symmetrical with that. And then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of trim this edge up so that it's nice, flush and even. But I don't want to shorten it at all because it's going to mess with the gusset. I did find that with my testers, that if they took a much tighter seam allowance, the 3/8 inch seam allowance, it was too small. And the problem with that then is then the gusset piece will need to be trimmed down to match that up. And then your interior liners need to be trimmed. It just has this ripple effect. So make sure that you're very accurate, only doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we don't want to take much off of this. Only thing we're trimming really is to make it even. Because the more you trim this off, then this is kind of a moot point that we even added it to begin with. You're not going to have that nice little gap to sew around. Instead, you're going to be right up against that zipper again, which is what we wanted to avoid to begin with. So this is really important that I would encourage you to get right before moving on to the rest of the gusset. We don't want it too narrow. Now we can go ahead and add our zipper pulls. I'm making sure that my print is oriented correctly. I like my zipper pulls opening from left to right, so I will feed them from the right-hand side. If you want double pulls, you would feed them from both sides. If you want one going the opposite direction, that's entirely up to you. There is no right or wrong direction to feed your pulls on right now. If you're observant, I have switched out to 2 different zipper pulls than the interior pocket and exterior pocket because I had a bad pull. I want these to match, so I had to pull from my stash a different set. Oh well. Okay, so I just kind of pull them to the center so they're out of the way. Remember, we already unclipped these, so these are free. Now we're going to go ahead and add our D-rings. We're now done installing zippers, so we're going back to our 3/8 inch seam allowance. So when we attach these, I do like a bit of an overhang for durability and strengthening. We don't want it just at the edge because this is a stress point, and over time it could eventually kind of wiggle out, right? So we do want a little bit of an overhang. But keep in mind, it is a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and the tighter you get to the D-ring, the more likely it is to not spin. So the more space you leave here, over time, that D-ring is going to spin around to the path of least resistance, and you see it on all the bags. Even the store-bought bags, I see them all the time. But the way to fix that is to get as close to the D-ring as possible. So give yourself enough space that you're comfortable with while allowing an overhang, and then go ahead and just stitch this in place 1/8 inch from the edge. So the D-ring's pointing towards the center, the raw edge is hanging over. Now I know it's a 3/8 inch, so I'm just going to give myself a little bit of wiggle room and center it right on that panel and drop my needle down. Then when I actually sew the gusset in place, I'll want to switch out to a narrow foot so I can get real close. Alright, so I've just sewn through the exterior. I have not caught the liners in that. I've attached the D-rings in place. I've not sewn through these liner pieces. Those are up where they should be. So now we need the gusset liners. You should have 2 of those. And then the gusset exterior, you just have 1 of those. We're going to start with the liners first. So we're going to flip this over. And then again, we're finger pressing this. We're going to work with this portion first, and then we're going to work with this portion. So everything is being done twice. I'm going to go ahead and help myself out by using some double-sided tape. I'm going to add it to the edges on each of these pieces. This part is definitely the trickiest part of the whole process to kind of understand and keep oriented. So we're going to use clips to kind of keep us oriented. I did add the double-sided tape to this back edge. So we're going to take the short edge of one of the liners and align this short edge going across just like this. And I'm going to use the double-sided tape just to hold it where it needs to go. But I'm just going to add a clip to that loose portion on the center because this is what we're going to sew first. So I'm just going to add the clip there. I'm going to remove the tape here, make sure it's not twisted in any way, and I'm going to repeat on this end, just like this. But I want the loose end up here to get the clip. That's what we're sewing. I'm going to flip it around, and I'm just going to go ahead and do everything all at once so that it's a smooth process. It goes quicker. Line that edge up, clip this top loose part, and right here, clip the top loose part. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're just going to sew this edge, each edge with a clip. We're going to start with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to start at the top and come just to the zipper and back stitch, and we're going to do that on each of the clipped pieces and stop. We're not sewing all the way across. So I encourage you to place your clips so you can stay oriented. Once you've made a dozen of these like I have, you could do it a lot easier, but in the beginning it's very easy to get flipped upside down. So we're going to go ahead and line it up for our 3/8 inch seam allowance and sew just until we get to our top stitching below. Back stitch well there. Clip. So then I'm going to flip it. So in order to sew it where I'm most comfortable, I need it, everything's kind of going to the left. I need to flip it and I don't want to sew the wrong piece. That's why the clip really helps keep you oriented here. Don't sew through anything. Once you get resistance up there, go ahead and stop and back stitch. I'm going to do the opposite end. So again, clipped side. And the last one. All right, so far we have not sewn this, but you can kind of see that it's forming that first inner portion of the gusset. But we're going to have to sew this next. But this is what you should have on all of the sides. I just added some double-sided tape for the front part. This is what we're working with so far. This has not been sewn yet, just these inner portions. So we're going to go ahead and stick our gusset in place now, the exterior portion. So line up those edges just like this and clip. Okay, so right sides are facing, just like that. Now, we're going to go ahead and sew up this edge. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew that portion we haven't sewn yet with the exterior. So we're going to come up to here, and we're just going to tuck this portion out like this. So you will catch a corner of it, a little sliver of it, but we want to pull it out of the way as much as we can. So that's where we're going to sew with the lining side up. Then you sew across this portion. We're coming up to the D-ring that's in here. So this is where I'm going to switch out to a narrow foot so I can get as close to it and maintain my 3/8 inch seam allowance as possible. And then we're going to fold this edge over again with a 1/4 inch. So they'll both look like this. We're going to catch that portion in the seam because there's kind of no way around that. And then we'll go ahead and finish it off the edge here. I just swapped out to a narrow zipper foot so that I can get really close to the D-ring here. So again, we're sewing with the lining side up. That's why I use the double-sided tape, just to make sure that the exterior gusset is still lined up really well. But I do want to just fold this so it catches it, but it's still out of the way. I'm coming up to this side, so I'm going to just fold it. So as much of it is out of the way, but you do just catch that corner. So this is what you're left with. Now we do that in this step versus sewing here, back stitching, moving it out of the way, sewing, back stitching, moving this out of the way. Because when we top stitch now through our gusset on this side, we can't see the underside, and we would have to fold those out of the way as we top stitch. So we just kind of do it preemptively. So now I can top stitch here on my exterior an 1/8 inch from that edge. Make sure all your lining is like pulled to the opposite side. If you kind of give a peek, make sure you got your little angled folds, and top stitch from the exterior side. Okay, so these, we only caught just that little piece, just like before, and this is how this part looks. So now we want to do the same thing on this end. Literally repeating what we just did. So we're gonna sew here, fold that down, sew across, fold that down. So they're mirror images right here. This little triangle, and then sew across. So far it's looking pretty crazy, but this is what you have right now. So you have 2 rings going on for the lining and 1 ring going on for the exterior. Now in the pattern, I do say that you can add a rivet here because this is a stress point. So you would just punch a hole 1/4 inch below this, and we're only going through the exterior. So we have not done anything with this portion yet. We're gonna clip through that overhang, or punch through the overhang and the exterior, and set a rivet on both sides if you'd like to do that. There's the rivets. I've only punched just through those tabs and the exterior. So now let's go ahead and turn it inside out so that we're looking at these little caught pieces. So we do need to release that so that we can press them open. So what we're gonna go to do is we're gonna go ahead and just clip right into up to the corner here. We're not cutting our stitching, but we have to release this so that it can open up just like that. So go ahead and cut it right to there. So then when you open it up, you do have a nice finished gusset that is free from anything. Just like that on both sides. So come back on this side. So just lift the edge. We're going to snip up to that stitching right along the top, but not through it, on both sides. There you go. Okay, so now we need to add center markings along this side. So we're going to go ahead and line up the gusset center marking with the panel center marking like this. Slide over to the side here and mark this. Slide over here, mark that. You have to do it on both sides. Everything's done twice. These are very important landmarks, so don't skip this step or you're going to be very confused when we install our gusset. All right, so now that we've added those to the side here, we need them on the lining too. So flip your whole thing inside out, just like this. This is going to be basted together, so the marking on this piece isn't as important as it is to mark it equal across on this side. We need it, this marking. Just going to fold that. There we go. See right where that lines up there, we need one down here. So again, this is going to be basted as one, so that marking is important, but we do need it right here, the inside portion of the ring. All right, so now we have our new landmarks, and we can go ahead and base these long edges together. So we're going to pull the lining so it is flush with the edge, and you can clip it just like this. We want to be able to see that lining kind of poking out. We don't want it to slide to the inside and not get caught in this basting stitch. So I just make sure that I can see it all the way around, and I adjust if I need to. Okay, so we're going to do that on both sides. Pull it so it's nice and taut, because we didn't top stitch through our lining, so just make sure it's not rolling up like that. Pull it nice and taut, line it up, and clip. All right, so now we should have what looks like one giant ring, just like this. So we're going to baste with our longest stitch length around the edge, using from the 1/8 inch from the edge, and do it on both sides. I went back to my standard foot and I've dialed it all the way as long as it will go. And I'm just going to put my panel right on top. So this is why it was so important that the lining matched up with this, because we're going to go ahead, we want them to operate as one. Okay, we want to see a bit of that lining because we don't want it to get not caught. We don't want it to roll under. One side, flip it over, repeat. Let's put it all together. Okay, so we don't need these right now, but we're gonna install the lining divider portions inside, and then it'll be identical for the exterior. So we're gonna do each of these things again twice, so you're gonna have plenty of practice with the lining before we go ahead and sew on the exterior, so it's gonna look really good. It's important that we do this in the correct order. So our zipper pocket is gonna be installed second, so just set it off so we're not even tempted to grab it. And if this is our bag being worn against us, then the zipper pulls are on the right. And I find that when you look into this bag, it's easiest if that interior pocket is on this back wall versus on that back wall, because it's harder to see. So hope that makes sense. So we're going to keep it oriented this way. Zipper pulls to the left. So looking inside, we want the plain wall on this side, not the zippered wall. So we're going to go ahead and clip this portion that's sticking up loose. We're going to clip that, and we're going to grab the opposite side so you can see this is all one continuous loop that I clipped. Okay, so we now need to turn it inside out. We're doing the clips to keep us oriented so we don't get our pockets mixed up. And while it's like this, we're going to pull this loose piece up so it's free from the gusset. Go ahead and just pull it up like this. Okay, so this is the ring we're working with. We're going to ignore everything else. I do find when I go to add it that opening my zipper pocket or my main zippers, it's easiest to sew. So now I've got my, because it's confusing, right? You got this piece. We're going to go ahead and tuck that out of the way. Tuck everything out of the way. We're staying oriented with our clips. So you're going to take one liner and you're going to line up that top notch here with that top clipped edge there. Then this is facing the right side of the other clip, just like that. Now I can go ahead and clip the rest of the perimeter going around this loop. So I personally find that the stapler makes this the easiest part. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead, staple here, and then I'm going to staple this portion. Where are my clips? Here we go. We're doing our landmarks right now. That's all we're doing for this portion. Okay, now that we've got our landmarks in place, go ahead and just line up all the edges, stopping just around the corner. We're going to staple up to the corner on all these edges, and then we're going to have to snip into our gusset. and we'll finish stapling after that. So as you can see, I've already stapled them in place. I'm getting as close to the edge as possible because I don't want it in my seam allowance, and I'm, dodging staples, trying not to catch it with my needle. So I clipped it in place until I come up around this curve. So now we have to cut into our gusset. So go ahead and put your finger in there to separate it from everything else so you don't accidentally cut anything that doesn't need to be cut. And we're just going to do little 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch snips so that this gusset can ease around that curve. So just cutting it around the curve. And then at this point, especially instead of using clips, because as I'm coming around the curves trying to get this exactly in place, the clips go flying everywhere and everything shifts. It's incredibly maddening. So I'm just going to now finish clipping that curve in place. So you can kind of see it from this angle. It allows it to just ease into that curve. So continue around the rest. And then this one I just kind of push the little tab down. You can clip it open if you want, or down. Reminder to go back to your standard stitch length since we ended last with basting. Okay, so now you can see I've stapled. I personally find it easiest to sew with the main panel against my machine, and I sew in the round this way. This one allows me to look here and finger press it so I don't create pleats in the corner. Some people prefer to sew it this way. You're just going to have to do trial and error and figure out which works best for you. But I find for me this is the best method. So I start where I have the most gap, and that's with the larger panel versus up top here. And I'm going to sew with the panel towards my machine and sew around here. I'll keep this one like regular speed and walk you through it. But since we end up doing this like 4 times with all of the pieces, I will speed up future ones. So this is their opportunity to get practice. You're going to press those pleats flat. Anytime you stop to pivot, make sure your needle is down. Use your fingers to smooth it out so you don't have pleats. If you have to hand crank like I'm doing, go for it. If you create some pleats in this corner on these lining pieces, do not sweat it. You're not going to see it. It's going to be tucked up high into the bag. So just use this time to kind of practice and do the best that you can. We are doing our 3/8 inch seam allowance. And every time I stop, I'm moving stuff out of the way. Remember I said to open the main panels because it helps this portion move and lay flatter for me. Gotta watch that staple. I got really far away from the edge, so make sure you don't hit it with your needle. All right, so the first side is on. You kind of look inside here, you can see you got your first wall. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my staple remover and remove all those staples, and then I'll take some pinking shears and just pink around this edge or cut notches just around the curves. We'll leave everything else as it is, but just around the curves. All right, so one side is on. I just pinked around the corners there, and you can kind of see, and you're welcome to flip it right side out if you want to double check your work. But right now I'm just going to go jump right into the next one. So now at least we're not going to get discombobulated because we only have the one ring left to work with. So we're just going to tuck everything else inside. So we've got our center mark there, center mark here. So now we need this one, and it's important that you open your zipper because we're going to seal ourselves inside, and we won't have any way to turn it right side out unless you have your zipper pocket now. So if you did the zipper pocket first, then you wouldn't have any way to flip this right side out. So again, line up your center marks. Just have them on the side here and the side here. And then we're gonna go ahead and staple it just like we did before, and sew just like we did before. So this is what we're looking like. I'm going to go ahead and sew this on, but I want to bring to your attention, anytime you have seams, so this is the pocket seam, we're going to go ahead and nest them. So one's going to go up and one's going to go down so that it decreases bulk there, and you'll do that on both sides. Looking good. Looking like a bag, right? All right, so now we've left our pocket open. We have to turn everything right side out here. So now hopefully what we've just accomplished is we created the interior divider walls. All right, there you go. There's one wall, and there's the other wall. We're almost done, guys. We do need to pull this pocket out and sew it shut. So with our edges that were pressed under already and the corners already angled, there's minimal bulk on those corners. Go ahead and sew this shut. Pocket is now sewn shut and usable. Go ahead and close that up. And now before we go ahead and add our front and back exteriors, we want to grab out those binding strips, okay? So we didn't add these in a previous step because they just get in the way and make it more confusing, but we do need these now. Now, when you open up your bag and you look in, you will see the binding on this wall. So I'm going to start and stop my seam along the bottom versus a seam along the top, which will be very easy to see. So I'm going to take one short edge and I'm going to fold it to the wrong side like this. And I'm going to line it up with that center mark along the bottom. And I'll just clip that just to start. Then I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm just going to kind of continue to sew it in the round until we come back here. I'll leave about a 3/4 inch overhang and then cut off the excess. When we attach this, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch from the edge. So it's going to be within our 3/8 inch seam allowance, but it will guide us when we go to make our snips later. So 1/4 inch, sewing this in the round. All right. So you can use your binding strips. You can use waterproof canvas if your interior is that, but I would encourage you not to do that if you're sewing on a domestic machine. Really, you want to stick with lightweight materials for this pattern unless you have a heavy duty or industrial machine to go with heavier materials. But I'm just lining up that edge as I turn the bag in a circle. I'm coming up on zippers here, so just make sure you can feel it, that you're not going to sew your zipper pull. I can see it's over there. If you're going to do your own binding method, you're not trying it this way, then you're not doing anything with your bias strips yet, because you're going to do it as the final stitch around once your front and back panels are added. And I will leave that up to you, but I highly encourage you to give this method a try because it was certainly a game changer for me. I was bad at binding and I hated it. Now I don't mind it so much. Go ahead and trim off this excess. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other side. Here's what we've got. Got our binding strips in place. I'm going to have my zipper pulls to the left, so I'm starting with this side because this is going to be the front of our bag, right? So I'm going to go ahead and clip that so we can stay oriented that this is the side we're working with. Go ahead and unzip. And then we have to tuck it kind of inside out. We want this portion that we're going to be working with. And it's tough to do because you've got two walls there. So just don't be afraid to push it, everything inside and out of the way. But remember, we clipped so we know which ring we're working with, because it would have been very easy. Trust me when I say that. It's like, okay, what one was I doing? What was the front? So these are this is the zipper panel. So that's top, this is bottom, and we're working with the front. I've pulled the zipper towards the center because I don't want it back here where it can get caught because we're going to not be able to see that. Go ahead and clip right sides facing. So the right side of the gusset here, the right side of the panel here, lining up those center marks. Now, before we go lining up these center marks, to me it's more important that we nest this seam just above here. We don't want them overlapped because you can see it gets quite bulky there. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bottom edge of that and place it right inside there so that they're staggered, because that is a bulky area. And ideally, if you trimmed it down and you trimmed from the top, these should still line up, but that's more important to me than this part. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. You see that bottom folded edge? You want to just place it right on top of the gusset there and clip so they're all nested. But again, it's pretty thick. So when we sew around that spot, we might want to hand crank if you're on a domestic machine so that you're careful and you don't hurt anything. Then go ahead and staple the perimeter. So I've stapled so far, but I've stopped around the curves. Now when we clip into the gusset, stop just before that stitch. Don't cut through it. That's going to be your guide, how deep you can go. Just little snips around the corner so that it can just ease around that spot and continue stapling. So we sewed the binding strip 1/4 inch. So as I'm going around, it is still 3/8 inch, but if you're getting around the curves and you're really worried about creating pleats and you have to take a narrower seam allowance, that's fine. Just make sure that you're sewing to the left of this line. Otherwise you will see that on your binding portion. I'm using my fingers to feel for any pleats, and I'm moving stuff out of the way, so ideally I'm not sewing pleats. But I'm just trying to pull everything out of the way. Every time I stop going around a corner, you have to keep your needle down or everything will shift out of place. So just take your time, pull everything together. Oop, my staple didn't get all layers, so let me make sure I get this. I can kind of feel a pleat under there, so I want to avoid that. All right, I'm coming up to that junction, which is the thickest part of the whole thing. So I'm just going to hand crank around that because I don't want to snap a needle going fast or that it can't handle it. So now we're coming up on our zipper, so do your best to push it out of the way. Take your time going around this curve. But see, this is why we added that panel, so we're not right up against the zipper. We have a little bit of wiggle room. And believe it or not, it does make it easier, even though I'm sure you're hating this part right now. Push any pleats with your finger out of the way. Coming up to that really thick area on the opposite side. So I'm going to hand crank that. All right, so I would encourage you, after you take the staples out, I would encourage you to flip it right side out to take a look at all your curves, make sure it looks good before we move on to the other side or do the binding, because that's the front of the bag. You want the front of the bag to look really good. All right, so I'm just kind of looking around my curves. I wouldn't say that they're great. So I have to decide before I move forward, do I want to fix it? I think I'm going to just turn it right side out and see what I'm working with. If it's horrible, I will fix it, but I'm not trimming anything yet. I want to take a peek first. You don't want to trim stuff, realize everything shifted or something, and then you have to work with a really tiny seam allowance. So I did get a little bit of pleat there, and then this shifted out of place because my staple had come out. I didn't get it. So I will go back in and fix that because that would bother me. But I feel like this side, I also came in a little shallow. But this is where it needs to be. See that junction? Looks good. But I did know while I was sewing it that the staple didn't catch this and everything shifted out. So I'm going to seam rip this, move it back into place, and that'll get rid of that ripple. And other than that, I think it looks good. Alrighty, take two. Here's hoping I fixed it. Just turn it right side out real quick, take a peek. Alright, fix that spot. That looks good. Just see some of my threads, I'll fix that, but much better. No more pleats. Alright, happy with that. Looks good. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the back. So remember, if we're going to go like that, we're going to have to turn this inside out like this. It's tough because there is that wall and now our front is on there. Just like this. This is the bottom edge along the gusset, right sides together. So find your center. Clip. And right there, clip. We're going to do that around this whole side. Okay, before we secure our binding, I want to turn it right side out again, just to make sure our back looks good as well. You don't want to realize you didn't catch something or something's wonky and you've already sewn the binding. That really busts your buttons. Okay. All right. I think that looks really good. All right, so now go ahead and turn it back so it's inside out. And we're going to go ahead and finish off with our binding. We just have to do the two perimeters and your bag will be done. Before we do that though, I do want to, I want to trim the seam allowance down. So you could see sometimes I wasn't as accurate with my seam allowance. So I'm going to trim it all the way around so it's a uniform 1/4 inch, and then we'll go ahead and wrap our binding. Now we're ready to finish the binding, so we're going to go ahead and pull it up so it's facing this way. And then I start at our landmarks, so go ahead and tuck everything down to that top edge and then do your double fold and clip. We'll start there, same thing. Fold it. See if I can pull that. And clip. So you want to fold it and come just past your previous stitching. This is also why we kind of add the binding strips towards the end, because if you're using quilt cotton, you can get a lot of frays with turning in and out and different steps. So now I just kind of go back in and finish the folds. When you get to the corner, you kind of just pop that corner out a little bit so you can see your seam right there. Do your fold and clip. So the goal is just to keep folding it until you cover that previous stitch. Now, usually for this portion, I would definitely switch out to a thread that matches the binding so that it blends in even better. And then this is also why I like to keep my binding matching the interior. So when you look inside your bag, you don't see binding straight up staring up at you. It's more, it really does blend in much better. All right, so I'm finishing up the perimeter and we're gonna go ahead and do that stitch. Okay, so now before I had you sewing from this way, and as long as you clipped over your seam and you wanted to sew from this side, that's fine. But I prefer to sew it this way and then I just kind of handle it under my machine going around. This way I can ensure that I for sure caught the raw folded side, you know, because this is already tacked down from our previous initial stitching. So that's where I use the stiletto, and I'll start along this bottom edge where the junction is, and then just kind of fit it underneath my machine like this. So with the stiletto, then I don't have to keep my finger really close to that. I can just kind of take the sharp edge and pull the binding over the seam, over the stitching. And just take your time with this. Sew as close to that edge as possible. Each time you stop to pivot, make sure your needle's down. Okay, so make sure to reach in the bag and make sure everything's pulled out of the way. You don't want to catch anything that shouldn't be caught while sewing your binding. Oops, it wants to fall off the edge, hold on. It's an awkward spot. I'm gonna start over. my bag wants to keep getting caught on this side, and so I have to pay attention over here, but also make sure it's not getting hung up on the other side. Okay, this one side, go trim up those loose threads and repeat one more time. You got to trim down the edges so they're a flush 1/4 inch on all parts, and then fold it over and sew. All right, the moment of truth. Bound both sides, now you just turn your bag right side out and push everything into place. So I got one compartment on one side with the zipper pocket, and the other side. Probably get that lint roller out and fix that, but go ahead and add your completed bag strap that we've already done in the beginning. Voila!